Hello, and welcome to the Table and Well podcast. I'm Tennison.
And I'm Ginelle. Thank you for joining us as we discuss topics and give practical tools that help you live, grow, and be in healthy, joy-filled relationship with God, yourself, and others.
For more information and resources, or if you're looking for coaching, connection, and community, please visit tableandwellco.com. We hope you enjoy this podcast. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of season 3 of the Table and Well podcast. We are starting over from scratch. I guess you can say that.
Wow.
I mean, we scrapped the whole thing. No. Just kidding. But no, we are coming back like we talked about in our last few podcasts of just revisiting.
Yeah, and kind of rebuilding the foundation.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and communicating the foundation.
Yes, reintroducing, revisiting, and kind of today starts the revisiting the maturity series, the very first series that we put out back in 2020. And so we want to start today with an overview of maturity and what that is. And so, again, we want to talk about the maturity indicators because that's where this comes from. When we talk about that, it's coming from the Life Model's maturity indicators. And again, the Life Model is really takes a look at how God designed us to actually grow and mature as humans. Again, like we said, we know that that's not something that's happening all the time and everywhere. But this model gives us a way to look at why we haven't fully matured, but it also gives us a way to look at how to fill those gaps so we can be who God designed us to be today. And so what we want to do is just start from the beginning and give you guys a overview of maturity and what that is. Oh yeah, that's me because we're having fun, guys. We're having
a great time.
We are having a great time. It's really good. It is really good. But anyway, sorry. Our notes. It's my turn, and anyway.
It's fine.
I know.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the podcast. So I need to let you know to just again remind you of the definition of maturity. Yes. And again, that is it's reaching my God-given potential at every age and stage of life. So again, it's not a reflection on your leadership role. It's not a reflection on your life stage or your age specifically. And it's not a reflection on any spiritual giftings or anything that would make you feel as if you have arrived to whatever level you think you're at. It really has nothing to do with those things. Let me take that back. None of those things. There are bits and pieces of that in there, but it's not the whole of it all. It's not it's not how you judge your maturity level or where you are in that when it comes to maturity. Right.
Because we often see that because we use some of these other markers as flag posts or signposts, I guess, in our humanity, it gets mistaken as maturity. People get promoted to leadership because of their charisma, but it doesn't, or maybe their spiritual gifting, but it has nothing to do with their actual ability to lead.
Correct.
And it's not because they don't have leadership skills. Oftentimes it's because they don't have relationship skills. And or we get to a life stage and we become parents, but that doesn't mean we have the relational maturity to be able to parent well, to that in a way that doesn't cause us to suffer or our children to suffer. And there's a lot of assumption that an expectation that these things will just intrinsically happen, but partially because we don't know or have never defined or heard a definition of what makes a good parent. Like what are the skills that make up a good parent, or what are the skills that make up a good or a capable, mature adult, or a capable, mature child, Like we also have the flip side of that where we have children who are parentified or adulted and turned into adults and parents in their childhood, and they look so mature. They look like some of the maturest among us, the most responsible, the most capable. And that doesn't mean they're actually mature internally because they've been forced to skip that childhood stage of maturity to then show up as an adult or show up as a parent. So we'll be talking all about that through this podcast. And But I think it's important to kind of set the stage
Yeah.
of clarity of as a culture, we have some markers, but we're talking about a different set of markers here.
Yeah.
And that's why we're revisiting this series. So we did this series 4 years ago. We've talked about this in the last couple podcasts, so we don't want to beat a dead horse. But our maturity series has been one of the most powerful series that we've recorded.
Yeah.
But it was like baby Table and Well. It was Tennison and Ginelle having learned and practiced out these skills by themselves and what we knew and understood at that time. And it's still to this day, we find ourselves showing up into spaces and we're like, listen to our podcast and go back to season 1, episode 1. And there's so much more we have to say.
Yes.
And we don't want to send people back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 4 years,
Yes.
4 years anymore. So we want to have the conversation with you again.
Yes.
And we want it to be a more robust conversation because it is packed. The maturity series is so packed full of ahas and concepts that really will shift the way that you understand yourself and understand those around you.
It's actually been really fun too in preparation for this, kind of going back and listening to some of the episodes again. I'm like, oh, that was really good. I'm like, oh.
I'm sure we'll listen to this podcast and feel the same way in a few years.
Probably.
But so fun. And sorry, now I'm struggling with my own notes. But yeah, so we're going to take some time over the next couple months to revisit the maturity series.
Yes.
And walk it through. And we want you to really use this maturity series to just become aware of your own maturity.
Yeah.
Where you might find gaps or where you may just identify areas that you want to grow. And as we explained in our last podcast, we have all kinds of resources now here at Table and Well that can help you grow through maturity.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that in 2020 we proposed this idea of maturity and shared it with you and literally had no way to help.
That's true.
Yeah, I know. But it was still important to us to get it out for understanding.
Yeah.
And now we can say, we're about to unfold maturity and we can help you walk it out. We can help you heal. We can help you go back and fill in those gaps. And we can help you do that in other people's lives as well. As you repair yours, you're going to also help others repair those.
So true.
And everything we do is super practical.
Yes.
This podcast is super practical. We will be presenting practical ways you can walk out and shift in your maturity after we present each maturity stage.
Yep.
And they're going to be practical tools of how to be a parent, how to be a leader, how to function well and better in your family, how to invite your children along on that journey, how to function better in your community. So stay tuned. It's amazing as it was, but I'm so excited to see how much more comes.
Yeah, very much so. And I just want to give this caveat real quick. One of the things that I want to be sure, we say maturity a lot. We talk about maturity. And I just want to let you know that when we say maturity, we are talking specifically about relational maturity in this space.
Yeah.
So
how to engage in relationship well, whether that's with yourself, with God, or with other people. It is not about whether or not you can pay a bill.
Right.
And that makes you an adult or rent an apartment. Although
that's part of it.
Although the skills here will also enable you to do that in a much healthier way.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get in. Let's do it. Let's jump in. So the first thing we want to do is tell you what the stages are and kind of give it just a real quick kind of here are the 5 stages of maturity. So the first stage is infant, and that's going to be ages 0 to 3. All right. And then you have child, which is 4 to 12.
Okay.
All right. And then you have adult. This is the one when people are like, what? But you have adult, ages 13 through the birth of your first child. And I can imagine people now are saying, wait, do you know my 13-year-old? Because they are not an adult. Well, remember we talked about the definition is every age and stage of life. And so there's stages inside of each one of these. And so that's a young adult.
And it's important to understand and know that these stages of maturity have a, can't think of the word, but a
range,
a trajectory of you don't show up, just as we all know, we don't show up to the day our baby is born and we're like magically amazing parents. No more than that 13-year-old is going to show up to that adulthood stage and be an adult or be capable of being an adult. But they're arriving at the stage of now having what they need to be able to continue to develop the skill of adulting and to develop into a full adult who is then prepared for parenthood.
Yep. So we'll talk through all of that. So the next stage after adult is parent, and that is the birth of your first child through your youngest child becoming an adult. So again, at age 13. And then the last stage is elder, and that is your youngest child becomes an adult until you die.
Until you pass on.
Until you pass on. So those are the stages. And so these stages are the same across the world culture, throughout history, and in scripture. And they're also proven in brain science. And so that's one of the beauties about this. This isn't just a...
some guy's theory.
Yeah, this is research. Again, it's Dr. Jim Wilder and his team, and again, different spaces where they pulled this from, but they looked at these different stages throughout all these different places, and they're true across the board.
But we would say they're not so true in our culture today.
Culturally, maybe not.
Right.
Yes.
And so how do we get back to that? It's kind of part of the question we ask, and part of what we're championing is how do we restore these maturity stages in the time that they should be experienced?
Yeah.
We do a ton of repair work with adults who never got what they needed in their infancy and therefore have gaps in their infant maturity. And spoiler alert, that is pretty much all of us.
Yes, that is all of us.
Yep. And same thing with childhood. You know, we always tease about this because we never advertise what we do as like, yeah, so we help you rebuild your infant maturity, because nobody's going to sign up for that.
Me.
Right. Nobody's going to be like, yeah, I have gaps in my infant relational skills. Nobody's walking around saying that. However, as you listen to this podcast and you listen to, and we'll start with infancy, you'll realize, oh yeah, I did miss out on that.
Yep.
And oh, it is still showing up in my life. Okay. So what do I do about that? And that's the beauty of what we do.
Yep. So let's talk about really quickly some principles of maturity. So I think these are really important as well. So a person's, like we said before, a person's age or stage does not determine his or her maturity. So you can't skip stages. But just like you can't be a parent at age 10, however, you can be an infant at age 65.
Right. And you can be parentified at age 10.
Correct.
You might have had to step into that space as a young child, whether that's parenting your siblings or parenting your parents, but you still can't skip the stage of childhood maturity. You're going to end up missing that because you've been forced ahead. And honestly, you won't get the parent maturity either because you're learning it or you're trying to function in it as a child.
Yeah, and so as we get through this, you'll learn too, and you'll understand that these skills really do build on each other.
Yeah,
now you can be a parent, and like for instance, we've done this with different people, and we've got to different stages, and like they have really strong parent skills.
Right.
Like there's some, but they don't have strong infant skills,
right.
And so maybe the way they have to negotiate emotions or different things like that when it comes to their own kids or their own self isn't 100% healthy.
Right.
And so they're able to navigate really in an adult space, but there's still these core skills that they're lacking. So being able to go back and fill those gaps is huge for them.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is also great. Maturity does not give you more value. Your value is simply because you are born. Your value comes from the fact that you are here on this earth as a person.
Right.
That is where your value comes from. That's where your worth comes from. It's not who you. It's not what you do, how you do it. It's not how mature
whether or not
you
you're
are.
mature.
Right.
Yeah. We're not saying that by any means.
Yeah. You are valued. You are valuable simply because you are. And so we want to be really clear about that. Now, on the flip side of that, maturity itself is valuable. Right. And so, a person who is fully functioning in their God-given potential is a huge asset to their community.
Yeah.
It's because they're able to navigate spaces that maybe other people can't, and they're able to just, there's a lot of things. They can bring other people up into maturity. We'll get into all of that, but it's a huge value add to your community, because maturity also increases the success and the satisfaction of your marriage, of your business dealings, your parenting, your leadership, any area where you have to show up to. Maturity, it's going to add value to those spaces as well.
Yes. And I would say, which isn't here, but I would also say that maturity adds value to you. I think even just as you were talking about, these parentified children who then later become adults who look high functioning maturity, they're often hurting inside and feeling a hole or a gap, and they're not because they're not caring for themselves. They've got all these great skills to care for everybody else, but they're struggling to care for themselves, and so they're not even valuable to their own.
They don't feel valuable to themselves.
Right?
That's really good.
And so maturity also will bring you wholeness and healing and an ability to fully live as yourself, which is just as valuable as it is bringing it to any other space or place in your life.
Absolutely.
Yep. And people naturally desire to mature, but very few know how to do it.
Yep.
And we've lost the skill or lost the knowledge and understanding and experience of how to do it within our community in our modern day and age. Nobody's walking around saying, whether it's in the body of Christ or whether it's in our family, saying, okay, I understand that my role is to continue to mature here and to bring you up alongside me, or to even, we like to talk about creating passing lanes where I'm going to also be raising you up to maturity. We get the idea of like, okay, I'm going to raise this kid to be able to like get to school or put their clothes on or take a bath or
make a sandwich
or walk or, unfortunately, it seems like anymore, like if we're lucky, get their own apartment and move out or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
But what we're talking about here is not, again, it's not about these like developmental tasks necessarily or things that we acknowledge in our modern society, but it is about that internal world of me as a whole person functioning relationally and being relationally alive.
Yeah, I think because somehow this I think can get confused or conflicted sometimes is when we can substitute culturally what is deemed maturity into these spaces, and we're not talking about culturally westernized, culturally maturity.
Modern,
we're talking about something different.
And so as far as we're concerned, maturity isn't automatic. It's not something that just happens to you as you grow up and become another year older, any more than, we introduce the concept of an elder or the concept of an adult at 13. Obviously, just because you hit 13 doesn't mean these things are in place.
Right.
In order for us to reach these maturity stages, we need others alongside of us in community modeling this for us and teaching the skills. We're only going to learn this through relational experience.
Yep.
Also, one thing that can affect our maturity is unresolved trauma. So there's both A and B trauma. And for those of you who don't understand or haven't heard the definition of A and B trauma, so A trauma is the absence of something you needed. That might look like neglect or a parent who was not able to be present, or maybe severe poverty and a lack of resource.
Well, yeah, and I think too that also is something that you needed. So that's emotionally. That's mentally. It's not just the physical side of it. It is the emotional, mental side of it, which is actually probably more.
Well, it's proven to be more detrimental. Than B trauma, which I'll explain.
Yeah, because it goes unhidden. It's the thing that's not you can't quantify that. There's no support groups. Well, maybe there are, but I don't. You know what I mean.
Well, it's just not. There's quantified is a great word to say there, and we talk about joy, and joy. The definition of joy is knowing, a deep knowing through relational experience that someone's glad to be with you no matter what.
Right.
And that should start in infancy. Like you are born, and you quote unquote should be the delight of your parents. And you should be. I don't know if it really is a quote unquote. That's it. That is proper human bonding
Yes.
is that you light their world up just for existing. Like, you can't do anything except for dirty a diaper
That's
and
it.
cry and
That's
eat
it.
and sleep. But there's such a joy, and the first thing you can see as a baby is joy on the face of your parent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually the first emotion you're able to feel as a newborn.
Yes.
And it's so like mind blowing. And when we're missing that in our lives, that's a trauma. That's
Yep.
absence of something we needed. We need to know that others are
Yes.
glad to be with us
Yep.
no matter
Matter
what.
what.
And we tend to lose that, especially as we age, or maybe we never had it in
Mm-hmm.
the first place. And so B trauma is another place where maturity kind of gets interrupted, you could say. So just bad things that we should not have experienced is B trauma.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And those can block this process. It's actually something interesting just to note here is that oftentimes you can notice in people who have experienced a B-style trauma,
Yes.
whether that's a loss of a parent or maybe some significant abuse or, something bad major happening, especially in their childhood, we will often, as people, revert back to the functioning that we had at that age when something else challenging is going on in life as an adult.
Yeah, when stress hits.
When stress hits, we'll find ourselves going back and functioning from life the same way we did at the age of that trauma happening. Yep. There is actually a stunting that happens in our ability to function. And this maturity maturity indicators are so great in saying, oh, look, okay, so this happened and you attempted to move on from it being a child and not having the skill. And again, I kind of joked about this in the last podcast of in the 80s, like nobody was like, oh, you have feelings. Like none of us had feelings in the 80s. Now all of a sudden 2020, like everyone has feelings. Yes. And suddenly we have a revelation that humans are emotional beings. Imagine that.
Yeah, and feelings are important.
Yeah. So we're actually going back and repairing a lot of that using this maturity model.
Yep.
Maturity actually never ends as well.
Right.
Just like we talked about, at 13, you enter that adult maturity stage. There is no end to this.
No.
There is no, like, I've suddenly arrived. Everything's great. Check, check, check. We can continually grow and change and develop these skills in every relational experience we have. There's another opportunity to grow.
Yep. Elder, even though it is the last stage or the fifth stage, there's so many nuances and spaces of being an elder in the community. So even when you reach that stage, maturity never stops. Never ever stops.
Yeah, and we really need people in community to help us to continue to grow in maturity.
Yes.
We also think about that, I think, a little wonky in modern day society, that we're like, okay, now you're an adult, like you're off on your own.
Go do the thing.
Like go figure it out. And if maturity never ends, then we're really doing one another a disservice by saying, well, you're on your own now, figure it out. And not that there's not an element of that, but yet we all grow and have an opportunity to grow for the rest of our lives by helping one another and by being in community that continually sharpens one another.
Yeah.
And maturity is true in that space. People need to know who they are, and they need to be frequently reminded by others in community and in family. And without that frequent reminder, we can forget and we can be stunted in our own growth.
Yep.
So
that was speaking of stunting.
Right. So some signs of blocked maturity are our inability to regulate emotions. And this looks like just being all over the map, high highs, low lows, and particularly, I guess probably more in men, you see anger or shutdown. In women, we could be extremely hopeless despair, and maybe it isn't fair to even gender this, but you're seeing where emotions are beginning to run what's happening versus you actually being able to regulate those and invite them in and give them space. We're not talking about shutting down or ignoring emotions.
Never doing that. Yeah,
no, not doing that, but also not letting them capsize you, basically, or harm others.
Yeah.
Because you're unable to regulate. Other signs of block maturity are inconsistent behavior, like you're not the same person over time. And a lot of us have experienced this if you've worked for a manager or somebody in leadership or maybe a parent, where you never know from day to day who's showing up to the office.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, today's the day we walk on eggshells, or oh my gosh, today's the day where they're fun and and they like us. What's going on?
Yeah.
So you see that inconsistent behavior when there are major maturity gaps. Motivated and led by fear. So oftentimes when we're lacking maturity, we'll stay in unhealthy relationships because we fear being alone.
Yeah.
Or we fear conflict. And then that begins to rule our lives, and we find ourselves in a cycle of maybe being led by fear. We'll have low satisfaction, which we actually have a whole lesson on satisfaction. It is something we need in order to feel complete in our days.
Yes.
And
so important.
With low satisfaction, we find ourselves always in pursuit of the next thing, or more, because no matter how hard we work and no matter how hard we try, it doesn't fulfill that longing in our heart. And often that longing can be directly related back to some of these maturity gaps.
Yeah.
Also, there's a poor sense of identity. You just don't have a solid knowing of who you are, and that's completely understandable when you haven't relationally experienced people speaking into you, people valuing you for who you are from the time you were born. That's all super understandable. And also part of maturity is having a belief system to guide you, which comes as you mature through those teenage years. You shift from believing everything that your parents said or taught you, that your caregivers, the people, the big people, the big people, into your brain literally becomes mush, and you begin to formulate what matters to you. What do you believe? And again, if we're not walking with our teenagers through this stage, even when they're rejecting us, and there's not a community to come in and help fill some of those spaces, we often will kind of result in not really knowing who we are, because no one's really speaking that into us, and we're left on our own to figure it out.
Yeah, so true.
And we flail.
Yeah, so true. There's so many stories, and we'll dig into that when we get into that specific maturity level. But so true. I think most of all of those things that you said, they stem from the lack of identity. And so if someone hasn't matured in each level, kind of as they go along, then that maturity doesn't follow them along with their age, or not maturity, sorry, their identity doesn't quite, their fullness of their identity doesn't quite follow them along. And so it's just like this compounding effect.
Yeah.
And so, so one of the things about each one of these ages and stages is that there are very specific needs and tasks that need to be accomplished for us to be fully mature in each one of those ages and stages of life. And so basically what that looks like is the needs are the things that we need our community to do. And so we can be fully mature. And the tasks are the things that we need to do for us to be fully mature as well in that. And if one of those doesn't happen, then we're not fully mature in that space. And so that's why community is so important. So important in that space. And when these needs and tasks are fully completed, then we actually are able to accomplish what the actual goal is for each one of those stages of maturity.
And we can fully be who we're created to be. We can't fully be who we're created to be in isolation and alone and trying to figure it out within our own head, whether we're 5 or whether we're 50. It is a both and we can't expect our community to do that work for us either. Parents who are adulting on behalf of their children aren't giving their kids a gift. There's also a part that kid / young adult needs to do for themselves. It is the both and.
It's the both and that's why when we talk about being fully mature or reaching your God-given potential at every age and stage of life, that's what we're talking about in that space. And so what those are really quickly, again, as an infant, the goal of an infant, the primary goal of infancy between 0 and 3 is to learn how to receive and how to live in joy. So again, knowing how to live in a space where you know that people are glad to be with you no matter what.
And that is the truth foundation of your life.
I say this a lot. You'll know a child has got that as an infant when they walk into a room at like 3 or 4, and they walk into the room and they're like, look at me, I'm here. And people are like, why aren't you happy? I'm in the room. You should be happy.
I'm breathing.
I'm here.
Right.
If you know, those are the kids you're like, oh, they got that.
They understood being the apple of someone's eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is also pretty cool because God says that about us. But
right.
anyway, so go ahead.
Without belaboring, learning to receive.
Yes. Yeah.
Like those are 3 words. Learn to receive. And there is an epidemic of adults who don't know how to receive and are struggling in relationships because they feel like no one's giving. Mm-hmm. But part of it is because they're also their receiver's not on, you know, and any attempt to give actually bounces back, and so then it feels really empty for both parties.
Right. Yeah, we'll
just gonna
throw that out there. Yep.
So learning to receive is critical.
Yes. So as a child, the primary goal is to learn to take care of yourself and learn what satisfies you. Mm-hmm. That's the goal there. So I could just keep going. We don't want to do that because we're going to dig deep. 3, as an adult, next stage is that you learn to take care of yourself and one other person at the same time. Mm-hmm. And another way to say it is that learning how to live in mutually satisfying relationships.
Yes.
Yes.
So, yes. Oh, I want to unpack that.
I know.
Go ahead.
We'll get there. Parent, learn to take care of your children or your family sacrificially with joy.
With joy.
Yes.
Not at your own,
It's not to gain.
Not to gain and not to burn yourself out either.
Yep. Yeah, so important. And then elder is sacrificially taking care of your community with joy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Elders matter.
Yes, they do.
And we will soapbox that
for
here in a couple more podcasts.
Can't wait.
Yep.
So so there's some of the things that, so again, those are the primary goals of each one of those. So what happens if we don't actually accomplish or reach these things? What happens I can't talk. What might be some of the things that you see in adults if we didn't quite master those spaces?
Right. So as an adult, if we haven't mastered infant maturity and we have gaps, we'll notice that our relationships are often weak or stormy. There's no real stability in our relationships, and that's attributed both to our inability to live in joy and experience that in our relationships, and our ability to receive in our relationships.
Yep.
If we're having gaps in our child maturity, we'll notice as adults that we struggle to take responsibility for ourselves, or we may notice in others a struggle to take responsibility for self. If we haven't learned all of our adult maturity skills, even as an adult, we'll notice that we're lacking the capacity and ability to be in mutually satisfying relationships.
Yeah.
And that just looks like our relationships are often ill-balanced. So we might find that we're always the one who's giving care in our relationships. And we're always giving. Or we're always receiving. A healthy adult relationship should look like a giving and a receiving, balanced, equal, and not in every moment of time.
Right.
And we'll talk more about that, but overall, the relationship shouldn't feel like one person is more of the giver or more of the receiver.
Yep.
If we have not mastered parent maturity as a parent, we'll notice that we have a lot of distant and conflicted family relationships, particularly with our children.
Yeah.
And then as an elder, if we haven't fulfilled all of those phases of maturity, there'll just be a overall maturity of the community declines, because when our elders are not mature, they cannot lead the community like we need them to, and they cannot help us mature. And we are following them whether or not we have any understanding of this or not. Yep. We learn as humans through modeling.
Yep.
And we are constantly watching those around us. You know, there's always the saying of you will become the 5 people that are closest to you. And we have completely disregarded our elders and our society. And so we don't even know what it is to follow them anymore.
Yeah.
But those that are around, we kind of write them off because many are not functioning as leaders in our community, and understanding that their existence is to draw us up and to be joy. We like to call them joy bombs in our community.
And we're going to,
Right. But part of that is that
Yes.
they're also lacking the skill.
They're lacking the
to
skill.
own that space.
Absolutely.
It's a both and.
Yeah, it is a both and. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I want you guys to know as well, like those are just kind of the major ones, not major ones, but those are the highlighted ones. There's others as well that we'll dig into when we get into some of these other ones. So I know we've thrown a lot at you in this space, but one thing that we do want to leave you with today is just ways that you can begin to grow in your own maturity. Simple ways, like one, listen to this podcast, listen to the next few podcasts, and identify some of those holes or gaps in your maturity. Just begin to identify them, the needs, the tasks that you may have missed in each stage. You want to continually begin to get God's perspective on your life and for your life and for others, and honestly, not compare the two. That's not how I want to say that. But like looking at those needs and tasks that you've missed and that you need to fill, and then getting his perspective of where do I need to go to get those, and who is that something I can do for myself? Do I need to go to God for that? Do I need to go to other people for that?
Right.
And really get his input on those things. Also, guys, it's really important to have tenderness and compassion for yourself.
Yeah.
In these spaces.
Yeah.
For yourself and for others.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. However, once you become aware, then you need to start stepping into that space. But have compassion for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so good because I think these maturity indicators, and as we talk more about the needs and tasks in each level over the next few podcasts, we can easily judge ourselves or judge other people by them, and that is not the point here. And there's also, I want to go back to what you were talking about when it comes to, okay, so I've identified a maturity gap, now what?
Yeah.
There is work to do, and as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, these maturity stages are possible, growing through these maturity stages are possible by the work that we do, that's our tasks, and the needs from the community. And oh man, what happens if we don't have the community? Right? We're about to go into these individualized maturity stages, but I just want to take a moment to talk about the fact that community is needed.
Yes.
And that is not a given.
No.
Unfortunately, anymore. That, now I understand what I need. Now I just need to go to my community and they're just going to give it to me. I just wasn't aware before.
Right.
So as we're talking about this, I just want to say that this healing can come in a variety of different ways.
Yes.
That community can also look like you being the best caregiver for you in those
really
spaces
good.
that you did not have
Yes.
an appropriate caregiver or appropriate parent. Like that was part of my work that was just so transformative because I was running into this wall of like, well, I don't have a mother and I don't have a father that can engage with me in this way.
Yeah.
And so I'm stuck, I guess. I can't get anybody in the community. Nobody understands what I'm talking about. And my counselor gave me the huge gift of saying, well, how many kids have you mothered? And at that point, because of foster care, I had mothered dozens. And she said, do you think you were a good mother? And I was like, yeah, overall with what I had. And she's like, have you ever thought about mothering yourself? And I was like, wait, what? But it unlocked something because I realized, okay, I can actually care for myself in the ways that I have been caring for others. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
I'd never thought that, not to disregard the community aspect of this by any stretch of the imagination.
Incredibly important.
Incredibly important. Like, and this is why we do what we do in Table and Well, because you should be able to find a secondary mother or a secondary father in the community.
Yes.
You should. It drives me nuts. That's part of that being the safe, healthy family of God that we in the world need, is that even in the promise of salvation and the concept of being born again, is that we get a second chance at family.
Yes.
We get a second chance at being that infant who, when they're in the room, everybody's eyes light up just because they exist. And what if, as a believer, and as a family of God, when other people join the family of God and are born into the family of God, our faces light up and they become our joy.
Yeah.
And we're just excited that they exist. And I think we can do decent at that at times, but then it's like, as that person matures through their spiritual walk, we're like, oh, now they're a rebellious teenager and we just want them out. Mm-hmm. We don't realize that there's a maturing process. That's
actually maturing.
Yeah, maturing process there too. Because we're not mature enough to walk with them relationally.
Yeah.
So we see this both in biological situations of like just the physical development of raising an actual human from 0 to onward.
Yep.
But there's also a double play here in the spiritual family, that there's another raising of 0 to 100, and we should get a second chance at family and a second chance at a lot of these. But we're not there yet, family. We don't have these skills. We are still learning them for ourselves, and then, which means we're not quite there to give them away as much as we would want, or as safely as we could, or as healthily as we could. So as like part of our work to do has been, okay, we understand this is the task.
Yep.
That's my part to do. And I understand I really need this for my community, but I don't have a community to give this to me right now. So how can I still care for myself while be my own community? And that can actually be a thing. And we'll probably unfold that more in the podcast to come. And there's relationship with the Lord.
Yes. Yep.
That we know the language of He's our Father, and we say that, but we don't. But what does that even mean?
Right.
Like, what does it mean for Him to help us grow in maturity?
What does that look like?
What does that look like? Yeah. How do we do that? Is that real, or is that just an idea that we say? Mm-hmm. And we'll be unfolding that too onward. But I just wanted to jump in there a little bit really and just say, don't lose hope.
Nope, don't lose hope.
As we talk about your part and the community's part, if community is not available to you, we help provide that, and there are other ways.
Yeah. And so really, guys, another big way to do it, and the last thing in this, is just start where you are. Mm-hmm. Wherever you are, start there and just begin the process.
Yeah.
Begin the process of growing. So I know, again, we've covered a lot of ground and we've gone a little long, but I think that's okay because I think it was well worth it. And I really hope you guys had a better understanding of kind of an overview of relational maturity. Mm-hmm. And so starting next week in our podcast, we're going to jump into each one of these stages and dig deep. And I'll say just be prepared, because each stage will probably be 2 to 3 podcasts. And so we're going to cover different parts of it as we go through it. So be ready for that. But next week we start with infant, and can't wait to share it with you.
Yes.
You've been listening to the Table and Well podcast. New episodes stream every Tuesday. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review to let us know. Also, subscribe on your favorite listening platform to stay up to date on all things Table and Well. To learn more, start your journey, or get information on how Table and Well can help develop your community, family, or teams to be relationally healthy and authentically connected, please go to tableandwell.org/collab to schedule an interest call, or you can email us directly at known@tableandwell.org.